everybody. Welcome to this little presentation that I put together. I recently attended took an online class from Kiss the Ground, and it was the soil advocacy training. It was really an amazing class that I'm grateful that I was able to take. And as part of that class, I was asked to do a 10-minute presentation. And after doing the presentation, I thought, man, I'd like to be able to share this information with the folks that I know through social media, maybe send it out on an email or two. So here it is, it's recorded, and I encourage you to stick with it at the end. At the end, there's a special offer to be able to jump on a upcoming class. So I want to start off with asking the question, what is wealth? Do you have as much of it as you want? How do you measure wealth? Do you want more of it? Well, this is my family. A couple of years ago, I'm the father of 9 children. My wife and I raise our children on a ranch in northeastern Nevada, and this is a picture of kind of our backyard. As I scroll through here, I'm going to go through a little bit about what my background is. I'm a third-generation rancher. We're raising our children on this ranch in Nevada. This is a pack trip that we took this summer up in the mountains behind our house. And this is my wife of 24 years, I think we're going on now. We grew up, both of us on ranches. I grew up in northeastern Nevada, and she grew up in more southern and central Nevada. And we had the goal, that we wanted to be ranchers. We met at college. We fell in love and got married, and my dad gave us the opportunity to come back to the ranch, and thought, here it goes. We're just going to live happily ever after. And then not too long after coming back to the ranch, we started our family, and my dad said, "Hey, Mom and I would like to go and serve a mission. Would you guys be willing to take over management?" And we were like, "Yeah, sure, of course." We had no idea what we were getting into. And my dad left, went to Central America. My wife Selena and I stayed on the ranch. We had a little boy by that time. And I soon realized, holy cow, there's a lot that I don't know. Even though I'd grown up as a third-generation rancher, I knew much of the tactical aspects of ranching. But as far as running a business, I sure had a lot to learn. So, I started on a quest. I attended schools and seminars and sought out mentors and read books. And learned a lot about holistic management and about proper grazing practices. And I thought, this is good. This is really good. And so my metrics for measuring success is it profitable? Does it pay? And we did all kinds of different things. If it looked like it would pay, if it would bring in more profit, we would run other people's cattle. We even ran goats for a while. Whatever it looked like. But, kind of came to a point where we plateaued, or at least I did. And maybe you could call it a midlife crisis. Maybe it was just not really finding my purpose. But it just led to kind of a feeling of frustration, like, I'm doing all these things. I'm following in the footsteps of other people who are successful. And, I again had great mentors, but it wasn't necessarily for me. And my measurement for success or for wealth wasn't really enough to give me the fulfillment that I needed to sustain that ongoing growth. And I still loved many aspects of ranching, but it wasn't until I came across this quote, probably in a book by Stephen Covey, and it was by Albert Einstein, and it says, "The significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them." And so, we were facing some significant problems within our business. Principally was that it was like, man, what is really our purpose here? Why are we doing what we're doing? And I'll maybe get back to my story in a little bit and tie it in, but in production agriculture, we're really good at compartmentalizing and doing what we do, and we do it really well. We're highly productive. We, meaning I'm a production agriculturalist. And so modern agriculture is extremely productive. We feed lots of people, but it is compartmentalized. So we have the dairy over here, we have the beef cows over here, and we have the sheep over here, and we have the pigs over here, and we have the vegetables and on and on. And those systems aren't necessarily integrated now in production agriculture because it is more productive if you focus on single species production. And it gets kind of messy and complicated if you try to combine those. And so some of the significant problems we face in agriculture, back to the quote, what are those? We've drought, floods. Boy, we've seen lots of that this last year. Poor farmers in the Midwest, weeds, disease, insects, deforestation, wildfires, on and on and on and on and on. So what is going on here? What do we do? Right? We, each of us in our own lives, in our own businesses, we're facing challenges. And I was facing challenges, and I realized because of that quote, man, I have to get to a higher level of thinking. And the process came about by meeting a great person. Her name was Nicole Masters. She's from New Zealand, and she taught a bunch of ranchers about soil health. And it really just expanded my mind when I listened to her speak. And we looked at the root zone in range grounds, and the picture up in the top left corner, that's what we're doing there. Is it's a soil pit, and we're looking how far down these perennial brush and grass roots are reaching down in through the topsoil into the subsoil and cycling nutrients. And she talked about the way different farming practices were either degrading or were enhancing the land. And I was really adept, I guess, after the classes that I took at looking at the forage on top and managing the livestock above ground. But I had no idea about the whole world that was beneath our feet. And that led me to the conclusion that, boy, of all the measurements of wealth, it really comes back to true wealth is biological wealth. Like we can, have money in our bank account, which largely now is just zeros on a computer screen or on our smartphone, or we can have gold, or we can have silver, we can have oil mines, or invest in other things. But a lot of those things, you can't eat them. And when times get tough, there are nations who are sitting on abundant resources, and their people are starving to death because they have disregarded the biology. They've disregarded the soil. And now they're suffering the consequences. My higher level of thinking was just that wealth, the measurement of wealth, the measurement of how I should manage was whether or not this is biologically sustainable, not just monetarily sustainable and profitable, but from a biological standpoint. And we'll discuss a little bit more about what I mean when I say biological, because maybe that term's a little bit new to you too, like it was to me. I didn't know why the earthworms were important. This is a picture on our ranch, just scratching around under a cow pie in the spring. And that's typical of what we find now that I've started to manage using biological wealth as my measurement. Soil degradation is really the most significant problem that I believe we face globally and that we face in industrial agriculture. Of all the things, and it'd be interesting to poll farmers and ask them, but I'd have to say of the people that we would ask, a small percentage would say that soil degradation would be key. But I'm going to explain why that is. On this quest for learning, I came across not only classes and mentors, again, teaching about soil health, but great books, such as this one called Kiss the Ground. And it expanded. It gave me a higher level of thinking and then an understanding that really things need to be in balance. And Thomas Jefferson is one of my heroes, founding father of the United States of America. He is quoted as saying that the soil is the gift of God to the living. Really, soil is a gift. And I believe that it is a gift from our divine creator. So what is the problem with soil degradation? Well, over the last 40 years, we are losing farmable land, like it's turning into desert. This word desertification means that it's transitioning from productive farm ground where it produces food, fiber to feed the world's population, and it's becoming desert and it's becoming barren. And so over the last 40 years, the statistic is that we've lost 1/3 of the farmable land. Now, it didn't happen just 40 years ago, right? We as a society in general have adopted practices that have led to soil degradation. Now, some societies, especially Eastern societies, have learned how to maintain soil health over long periods of time. But our Western mentality, profit-driven mindset tends to lead to, use it up and move on. Well, there is no more land. Like, we can't move west anymore. And so why is this over the last 40 years? Because mechanization, irrigation, degradation, these things have increased because we've been able to expand the scale and the scope through the industrial revolution, right? We had the machinery in place after the world wars. We were able to transition that machinery from war machines into tillage machines largely, and do what was already happening on a smaller scale, on a larger scale, which has led to this higher level and increased pace of desertification. And that has led to 4 tons of topsoil is being lost per year on farmable land in the United States of America. So that's this statistic. 4 tons of topsoil is being lost. And how is that topsoil being lost? Well, it's being lost through erosion, wind, and water. And it's also just being killed, basically. Topsoil is the living portion of the soil where the roots derive their nutrients to be able to feed the plant, to feed the animals, and to feed the people. And through modern industrial practices, chemicalization, fertilization, irrigation, mechanization, those things are being lost. And here's a really good picture that I took. I was driving down the freeway in eastern Idaho a few years ago in the spring, and there had been a major flooding event that happened. And I saw this out the passenger side window, and I actually had to drive down the road and turn around and come back and stop on the side of the road so I could snap this picture, because it's real. I mean, this really makes it real. And if you'll notice that off to the sides here on the native ground, there's not the erosion that happened from this flooding event. But why did it happen on this tilled field? Well, basically because our soil is sick and it is broken. We have disregarded the biological principles for long enough that Mother Nature has said, okay, you've got to change your practices. We've adopted generally, and I'll talk in generalizations, but if we are losing 4 tons of topsoil, that's a pretty staggering statistic. Generally, modern agriculture is degenerative. That means that each year we are losing less topsoil, we're losing less vitality, we're losing less production. On this graph here, basically the ecosystem carrying capacity is going down over time. And that is very real. I mean, that is, inputs can only go so far, meaning synthetic fertilizers and things. and then you reach the law of diminishing returns, and actually the more you spend, the worse off things are, which leads to degradation. And so we saw, you know, people a lot smarter than me, they said, hey, we got to stop this. So let's start this mantra, sustainability. Let's stop the degradation. And that's great. Sustainability is a wonderful principle, but it's ahead of its time, because if we were now to sustain what we already have, we're sustaining a degraded resource, basically, right? We're not at the level that we were pre-industrial revolution, where we have high levels of soil organic matter in our native soils, right? We're in a lot of places, we're farming subsoil. We have no life in the soil. And so we need to adopt more of a regenerative model. I really like this graph because it shows that over time we can regenerate soils, and there are people that are doing that. If you leave things to ecology, it's estimated that an inch of topsoil takes centuries to build, right? Through the weathering process, the ecological process. You can speed that up. And there are regenerative producers who are making topsoil, creating topsoil through the biology in a matter of decades instead of centuries. You know, in a matter of years, are growing inches of topsoil on their farms and ranches. And how are they doing that? They're doing that by adopting regenerative principles. And we'll talk about what some of those principles are. The word regenerative, what do you think about when you hear that word, regenerative? It means to increase, to improve over time. And that's exactly what it means. So if you're going to be a regenerative producer, adopt as many of these 5 principles as possible. Number 1, least disturbance, chemical, mechanical disturbance. That is very degrading to the soil. Leave living, ideally perennial roots in the ground as long as you can, year round if possible. But if you're in a cropping situation, plant cover crops. You know, and that leads to the 3rd principle, soil armor. Even if you have a cropping annual soybean, corn, grain rotation in your system, you can leave armor on the soil by 1, leaving some stubble there. Number 2 is planting cover crops so that there is that living root and there's something to hold the soil in place. Animal integration, and you know, back to the beginning, we need to unite and not compartmentalize, not divide the production systems. Years ago, it used to be that, you know, there were cattle and there were crops and there were fruit trees and orchards on smaller scale farms, and they provided for families. And now, you know, it's big production, monoculture, meaning one species over vast number of acres, and that is very degrading. And increase the diversity, the biodiversity. And some of the ways that we've been able to do that is, well, I really love livestock grazing. That's my number 1 tool. It's a great tool. It can be regenerative. It can be degenerative depending on how the cattle are actually used. We've also incorporated multi-species grazing so that the chickens follow the cows in our irrigated pastures, and we have sheep that graze ahead of the cows on our mountain pastures to be able to control noxious weeds, poisonous weeds. We're applying compost tea back to the soil, actually not only feeding the biology in the soil, but we're adding beneficial biology, microbes as a foliar spray back to the soil. And we do that sometimes through mechanical means or sometimes through the irrigation water. Planting cover crops, again, utilizing as many of those 5 principles as we can. And here's a picture of some cover crops that we planted in an irrigated situation. Diverse mix. So overstory, understory, planting in after harvest, grazing some of it, leaving lots of stubble on the ground. Cattle can be degenerative. They can be regenerative. It depends on which system you adopt. Do you want the highly productive system that's chasing after profit, that's chasing after production, or do you want the more balanced system which incorporates in planned grazing? Actually, all 5 of those principles can be incorporated. And that can be done with minimal inputs and minimal labor. Single strand polywire fence moved daily or multiple times a day. And as a result of that, we're seeing on our land stream banks that are healing. Over the last decade, this bare soil, deep gullies, steep banks has turned into this, where we have willows and we have sedges coming back into the creek bottoms. And it's not perfect, but it's on an upward regenerative trend. We're holding more water. And again, we're doing that through, or just basically by abiding by those principles, using minimal technology with a solar powered electric fence. As a result of that, this is what we're seeing now in our pastures. You know, instead of chasing off our biology, we're inviting it to come back. We're encouraging it to stay. And we're building soil organic matter, which is basically means that we are taking carbon, which is an atmospheric pollutant, and we are incorporating it into the soil where it is stable, where it feeds the life of the soil, and it actually builds resiliency within our agricultural system. So we're taking a byproduct, using it, putting it in the soil, and that's measured through soil organic matter. This picture was taken in an irrigated field. It was the year after we first applied compost tea to our fields. And I really wondered, you know, as I was putting this brew out, man, am I really doing any good here? Like, I didn't really see a big boost in production, forage production, at least not that first year. That next year, my boy and I were out irrigating, and we'd placed a dam irrigation tarp in one of the ditches. And the next day we came back, and as I pulled that tarp and removed the sod that was on the sides of that tarp, I found this picture right here. And it was a spiritual, it was an emotional experience. And it was almost like the biology and the life was saying, thank you. Thank you for inviting us back. Thank you for honoring the work that we're trying to do. Thank you for working as a partnership with us. And that is what is possible when we focus on true wealth, biological wealth. Sometimes we find that we just get stuck. You know, we don't know where to go. We don't have the level of thinking that it takes to get us out of the muck and the mire. Well, the best way that I found to be able to overcome that very real sensation of being stuck is to increase your learning, like find a higher level of thinking. We have to move past the sustainable model, incorporate the regenerative model. And that is my invitation to you, is to jump on the next soil advocacy training with the group Kiss the Ground. Whether you are a producer, whether you're a food advocate, whether you're somebody who's just concerned about climate change, this group is really a good fit. In this last class, we had folks from Australia, I think at least 4 people from South America, from Chile in South America, Central America, all over the United States. They jumped online and they were part of this last group, and it was amazing to see that while they had, you know, different unique challenges where they were in their environment, we all shared the same purpose, that we want to regenerate soil, and we believe that we have the tools to be able to do that. So this is my contact information. Reach out if you have additional questions. I'm going to post the link on social media to be able to jump on the next class. The class is very, very reasonably priced. It's a 7-week long class. The recordings, it's done live. It's done actually over Zoom, and the recordings are available if you're not able to get on and watch the class live. But I definitely encourage you to take the opportunity to take that class. My name is Jared Sorensen. I sure appreciate you jumping on and watching this video. And I hope that you will take advantage of this opportunity to jump on the next class. Thank you very much.